Okay, so I've got one question this morning, and that is, what the heck happened to Mike Pence yesterday? Mike Pence was scheduled to speak at some event. It was sort of a campaign-y sort of event, but not officially a campaign event in New Hampshire, where they were supposed to talk about, the opioid crisis. Of course, New Hampshire, there's a big problem with folks who are addicted to opioids and become heroin junkies. From what I understand, that is the worst state for heroin addiction overall. And the Trump administration obviously wants to show that they've made some progress on that issue going into the 2020 election, because even though, places like New Hampshire don't have, I think it's 4 electoral votes, it's still an important swing state. And I believe Trump barely lost it last time. And of course, the opioid crisis is a big topic in other poor states, places where you have a lot of poor rural folks, like in Iowa, which is also a swing state, and Ohio. So needless to say, you would think that this would be a pretty important event that they would want Pence at to try and promote the administration's actions on this issue. However, it was canceled at the last minute, and which is kind of insulting to the folks who showed up to actually hear the vice president out. So you would think there had to be something pretty significant to warrant them canceling this event, literally as the vice president's plane was already in the air heading from Washington, D.C. to New Hampshire, which is a very short flight. Now, apparently we learned later in the day that President Trump recalled Vice President Pence back to the White House. In fact, the exact words of the report that I read were that he was ordered to come back to the White House. But we know quite literally nothing other than that. There was no news all day. There was no word given to the press as to why the vice president was recalled, why the president ordered him back, and what exactly they were talking about inside the White House. Now, the most obvious thing that this could have been would have been a death threat against the vice president, some sort of a bomb threat on the event. Of course, we know that it wasn't a bomb threat on the event because the event wasn't evacuated. The people were still around there because they actually made an announcement at the event that the vice president would not be attending, but he would like to reschedule it in the future. That announcement was made from a podium, I believe, at the event venue. So there wasn't a bomb threat on the actual event. Perhaps there was some sort of assassination threat. That could still be possible, but I would have to imagine that they would have evacuated the place if there was any sign that there was going to be some kind of assassin coming in to try and kill people, because if he found out the vice president wasn't there, perhaps he would want to kill some other folks. And of course, I would think that events where you have the president or the vice president in attendance, there is security screenings before you come in. So I'm not really sold, based on what I've seen, that this was a threat against the vice president. And frankly, if it was a threat against the vice president, I don't see much reason why they would have to keep that secret. There have been threats made against public officials before, and they don't try and keep that all hush-hush, from what I understand. Perhaps they do, and there's many more than we even know about going on, and that we just hear about a few of them. Now, what was interesting was that the vice president's press secretary, I guess it was, or spokesman, they came out and said that why the vice president was recalled to the White House will become clear in a couple of weeks. They said everyone will figure it out, and we'll know by then. So just be patient and wait. Now, that's pretty cryptic. Does that mean that perhaps there was some sort of threat against the vice president, and it's going to take them a couple weeks to track the guy down, and they don't want to give him a heads up that they're looking for him? And then when they catch the guy, they'll bring him out and say, look, this is the guy that made a threat against the vice president in New Hampshire a couple weeks ago. That's certainly possible. However, what the immediate speculation was at the time when Pence was called back was that this had something to do with national security matters. And that's because when the vice president was called back to the White House, and after he canceled his whole day abruptly, around that very same time, within the same hour, Vladimir Putin also canceled an event that he was supposed to appear at, and cleared his schedule for the day and headed back to the Kremlin. And Putin's folks confirmed that, in fact, Putin did so because of national security matters. He was meeting with the defense secretary and with, I guess you would call them the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but whatever the Russian equivalent is, but it was that sort of person, the top military leader. Now, we have no word on who Pence was meeting with, if anybody, at the White House. We have no idea what was going on. However, what we do know is that when the vice president was called back to the White House, he went in and he did not reemerge from the White House for something like another 7 hours. It was pretty late in the day because I followed this all day yesterday because I was waiting for something to come out, some news, because this seemed very, very odd. And finally, he came out to no fanfare. Now, there were no other major players spotted at the White House that day. We didn't see John Bolton or Mike Pompeo or the Joint Chiefs of Staff, so we don't know necessarily what was going on. One would think if this was a national security matter that Bolton and Pompeo would have been playing a prominent role. And so their absence would seem to negate the idea that this was a national security matter. And it should be noted that the Iranians just recently, in the last couple days, have gone over their stockpile limit. In fact, I just did a video on that yesterday, and the limit of how much enriched uranium they're allowed to stockpile. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that they're anywhere near close to getting a nuke, because they're doing it at the wrong enrichment level, and I went over that in my video. So I don't think necessarily that they were worried about some imminent nuclear threat from Iran. However, it is interesting that we had this right around the time of the Iranians going over their stockpile limit. Of course, it wasn't at the exact moment. Now, a major tell to me was that the President of the United States did not tweet very much yesterday, and that in and of itself is not strange. However, when you realize that yesterday was a day in which the S&P 500 made new all-time highs, something that the President is very concerned with, it is very odd that he didn't tweet about that. I would have expected him to, at the close yesterday at 4 o'clock, to have tweeted, stocks at all-time highs, thank you, Mr. President, just like he's been doing. He's been tweeting about the stock market nonstop. It's what he's the most proud of. And so the fact that he didn't do that makes me think not so much that he just didn't care, because the President cares very much. That is his barometer for the health of the economy, is the stock market. And considering that he didn't tweet about that, that makes me think that he was probably in a SCIF, meaning a secured room where the President is briefed on documents, where, of course, there is no signal in or out. There is no phones in there. There is no tweeting. There are no push notifications telling you, hey, the stock market just closed at all-time highs, and prompting the President to then go tweet about it. In order for him not to have taken a break, no matter what he was doing, I would have expected him at 4 o'clock to say, oh, hold on, everybody, I need to check stocks and see how we did today. I'm sure the President does that every day, no matter what he's doing. So the fact that he didn't do that tells me that there was something very serious going on. What, apparently, we won't figure out for another couple weeks, at least according to Pence's spokesman. Now, the strangest thing of all, perhaps, is that there were no leaks about this all day. Normally, especially with the Trump White House, or any White House, really, your reporters have their sources inside the White House, and they'll give them hints, even if they can't tell them outright what's going on. They'll at least say, hey, there's some kind of national security concern, and that's why the vice president was pulled back, or there was some threat against the vice president. They can say that. However, this is something that's either so serious that people kept their mouths shut, or it's so serious that it was compartmentalized and kept really away from the people who leaked to the press. Which, again, is more evidence to me that this is not a nothing burger. This wasn't just some simple scheduling issue, and the vice president, just because, to quote the White House, something came up. There's a little more to it than that. If something just came up, even if the White House didn't tell us about it, folks would be leaking about it and saying, oh yeah, the president is throwing some kind of temper tantrum because the Supreme Court ruled that he can't put the DOJ decided to respect the Supreme Court's ruling and not put the citizenship question on the U.S. Census for 2020. If it were something like that, and Trump just called Pence back in a fit of rage because he wanted to vent to him about, how mean the DOJ is and how bad Bob Barr is, we would have gotten leaks about that. Nobody's going to try and keep that secret, and everyone would have been joking about it probably at the White House. So assuming what Pence's Spock said was correct, I will do a follow-up video in a couple weeks when we find out what exactly happened yesterday. But needless to say, I'm eagerly awaiting whatever that is. Now, if you gain anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and subscribing. And if you do subscribe, please do click the bell, because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks here in the next one.